co-host Garland Nixon. There's more on the other side. Stay tuned. We are back, and you're listening to the Critical Hour on Radio Sputnik. I'm Wilmer Leon, joined here by my co-host, Garland Nixon.
Thank you, Wilmer.
Alex Saab's lawyers demand U.S. courts uphold diplomatic immunity. This is according to Venezuelan analysis. Warn of dangerous precedent. Saab's defense team submitted the official diplomatic papers issued in 2018 by the Maduro government 2 years before his arrest. What does this mean for Alex Saab, and what are the political or potential problems for diplomats going forward? For insight into this, we turn to our next guest. He's the regional election observer last year for the Venezuelan elections, co-founder of North Florida's Hands Off Venezuela, and president of the Hands Off Venezuela Club at the University of North Florida, Alex Suarez. Mr. Suarez, welcome to the Critical Hour.
Thank you for having me.
So if you could explain exactly what the defense team submitted and what precedent this is now setting as it relates to diplomatic immunity.
So there's two parallel judicial processes happening in the United States right now. There's one in the Georgia courts and there's one in Miami. And in Miami, I attended the arraignment and the hearing of Alex Saab. And I can tell you that Miami, they can't do much at this point. They've been frozen. And what I mean by that is the other the other lawyers as part of Alex Saab's defense team, like David Rivkin, they're working in the Georgia courts right now for them to recognize Alex Saab diplomatic immunity. If they recognize the diplomatic immunity, that will obligate the Miami courts to release him and send him back to Venezuela.
So, what are your thoughts? I mean, there are two things. It's kind of like there's two ways to look at it. It's kind of like the Julian Assange case, in that if you look at the letter of the law and international law, clearly Alex Saab was acting on behalf of Venezuela. Venezuela recognizes him and authorizes him as a diplomat. The countries that he received him authorize him as a diplomat. So under international law, clearly he's a diplomat. But if you see this as just another example of United States lawfare, where they use the law, they use the guise of international law for an imperial policy. It seems as though the courts are just another tool. What are your thoughts on how this works out?
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned Assange. One of Saab's international lawyers also represents Assange, Garzon. And their charges are actually similar because they're both accusing them of conspiracy. So they were accusing Assange, of course, falsely of conspiring to hack. And the only remaining federal charge, which could still face 20 years in prison for against Alex Saab, is conspiring to money launder. But they're not even charging you with money laundering. And the other 7 federal charges that they had against him, they dropped. And they claimed it was because of a deal with Cape Verde, who originally was holding Saab, but that's false in my opinion. They had no evidence. So they're just basing it off some testimony that apparently he conspired to money launder. What he really did was defy U.S. sanctions and successfully bring aid to Venezuela through his diplomatic connections. And so as a retaliation for Alex Saab's effort and success against U.S. Illegal unilateral sanctions against the people of Venezuela, that's according to the UN that they're illegal. Out of retaliation, they captured him a couple of years ago in Cape Verde, physically and psychologically tortured him, and then recently extradited him to South Florida, where this process goes on.
What are the potential problems that the United States is setting up in terms of for diplomats going forward? One of the things that I remember hearing about is, for example, Guantanamo Bay, it was that as it relates to the Geneva Convention, is that the United States has to be very, very careful about how it treats prisoners, because we don't want other countries to violate the rights of American prisoners. What does this do potentially in terms of how diplomats are treated, particularly if the United States continues down this path?
Well, Alex Saab, there's documentation that shows he's been a Venezuelan diplomat since 2018. And one of the claims that was coming out